Good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar. I'm just waiting for my colleague David Grant. David, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ryan. Good morning. Good morning, Ryan. Good morning, everybody.
Great stuff. I will pass over to you. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking your time in joining us today. As Ryan said, I'm David Grant. I'm the Software Solutions Manager here at Academia. And this morning, we're really pleased to be partnering with Okta to deliver a webinar for higher education to talk about identity management. So I'll just jump into the agenda, go through quickly what we're going to talk about today. We'll start with some introductions. We'll give a bit of background on who we are in case anybody on the call is unaware. And then we'll hand over to Okta, who will give a bit of an overview of their solutions for the sector. We'll hear a discussion with Scott and a US university who have utilised the solution and get to hear about their challenges and how they overcame those with Okta. We'll then delve into the process of managing joiners, movers, leavers, how we can automate provisioning prior to going into a demo of the platform itself. And we'll then summarise and have time to go through any questions. On the right, you will see a chat pod. So if you go into there, you'll be able to fire in any questions. And again, we'll address those all at the end. However, if you want to, there's a generic email address that comes into my team at the bottom of the slide as well. Feel free to drop us over anything and to pick up any conversations on a one-to-one basis. And just a reminder, this event is recorded and the slides will be made available to you on demand afterwards. So to jump straight in, introduction-wise, who are Academia? Again, looking at attendees and certainly the organisations as well that have registered and attending today. Hopefully, most of you know us already, but for those who don't, Academia are an IT specialist supplying software, hardware and services into a range of sectors, but we turn over around £90 million and the vast majority of that is within the higher education sector. Probably around 70% of our business is in higher education. So a really important part of our portfolio, part of our business, and we resource accordingly. And we have 8 dedicated account managers simply managing the universities with around approximately 20 each. And they're supported by administrative support, customer services, and product specialists, such as our cybersecurity specialists who have been really integral in building out our Okta relationship. It's applicable to mention frameworks, and at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice the regional purchasing consortium slides, and every university is a member of one of these. And these guys all club together to come up with framework agreements, the best routes to market for higher education and applicable members. And that includes looking at things like software. And the reason this is applicable is for the last 4 years and for the next 3 years, Academia are the first ranked supplier for all dedicated security vendors. And that means we're very easy to order on, which is great for at times and certainly keeps your colleagues in procurement happy. But why that's more applicable here is because it gives us really unique insight as to what's happening in the sector. We see a lot of common solutions being procured. We see things working. We see things which also don't work at times. And it's a really good opportunity and a good place to be to really start identifying common trends and to start sharing this knowledge back with customers and with suppliers. And it's really around the whole concept of building partnerships. And again, with our supply chain, with people like Okta, we're really excited to be doing this today. We've been working with Okta for some time, and they have a sort of fairly new, I don't want to say too new, but fairly new restructure and focus on education, and potentially more applicable for you on the call, new education pricing as well. And that's great. So we build these relationships with key technologies and often ones that we've seen had some success in a sector already. And again, Okta's a good example of that. And then on the right of this slide, you'll see a sort of life cycle diagram that talks around how we manage our customers at very high level, in fairness. But from a pre-sales perspective, we have our product specialists, like I mentioned earlier, including cybersecurity. And we also have third-party consultants and specialists who we've worked with over the years, tried and tested to help support customers overcome those challenges. I touched on the frameworks, and it allows us to really offer some procurement support and the ability to order any application that, with the exception of Microsoft, and retain OJU compliance is really beneficial for a lot of our customers. But it's not just about selling software. It's really important that we're supporting the delivery and the commission and ensuring these are successful deployments. So again, through our in-house expertise and through third parties, from small boutique partners up to some of the big ones. This is a really good opportunity for us to help support the delivery and work from that pre-sales piece all the way through to delivery. And again, probably the most important piece is that customer success. We want to make sure projects are successful. We want to make sure things are working. Again, I mentioned earlier, 70% of our business is in higher education, and we know you all talk. So it's very important that we deliver a good job, and we do that first time. And we move up to the orange piece where we're having that constant ongoing review, and whether that's through account management, through the introduction of peers and other stakeholders within academia, is a really important piece for us. So I briefly talked about some of the trends we see, and to kind of bring this back into context with what we're talking about today, some of the trends we're seeing around identity management in higher education probably won't come as a surprise to you, but we'll quickly touch on these before we hand over to the guys at Okta. So an increased level of security threats. This has been a consistent challenge, I suppose. And if you looked at security threats generally, but certainly for HE, there'd just be a graph pointing upwards with these just becoming more and more and varied. And I remember reading an article from the National Cyber Security Centre a year ago talking about higher education, and there's lots of vulnerabilities, and the concept of state-sponsored espionage almost scared the life out of me. And when you think about it, the universities in the UK have really important data, really valuable data, and therefore will be targeted by all sorts of organisations. And it's just one example of how we're seeing an increased level of security threat to the sector. One that I'm sure resonates with everybody is the last year we've been forced to deliver remote teaching and working. That's meant to deliver new applications, new processes in a fraction of the time we would normally do. And these fundamentally will create more risks for us as well. The interesting piece around this is really how much of this is going to stay. And I think a lot of the concepts of what we've seen in the last year will remain going forwards. They allow institutions to scale and grow. And again, that ties really well into digital transformation, which underpins a lot of these types of points, and probably an overutilized term. But it's fair to say COVID has massively accelerated digital transformation, and higher education is no exception. I'm sure on the call, many of you have had to deliver a project which would normally take maybe 2 to 3 years from conception to delivery. And you've had to do that in 2 to 3 months, or maybe weeks, maybe even hours, depending how fortunate or unfortunate you may be. And again, this constant change is bringing in more, there's more analytics, there's more data, there's more systems. And again, these create more vulnerabilities. Touched on this briefly just now, but the concept of the increasing number of apps and systems to access. I remember doing some events on identity before where we talked about how common 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is as a password. The amount of apps and systems people have to log into. Users want to simplify that process. And obviously from an IT perspective, we want to protect it, which are naturally almost a conflict. And it's vendors like Okta who really provide solutions to overcome these types of challenges. End user experience is always a key thing, but I think certainly since the tuition fees changed in higher education, there's been a massive drive we've seen in terms of really ensuring the user experience is positive throughout. And IT plays a really big part in that, especially right now. So it's really important that, again, we deliver a positive end user experience without having a hindrance on our security setup. And the dynamic populations of students, staff, and alumni. And this is where there's probably some unique challenges around identity management for higher education. You have students where institutions are more interested now in actually managing that full life cycle. I want to know about a student before they even join us. I may need to give them access to things before they even join us as a prospect. I need to manage that student all the way through their life cycle towards alumni, or potentially even staff as they change roles. There could be 2 separate organisations on this call today who have to onboard each other's staff and maybe even students, where you collaborate on projects. And one thing we are seeing is lots more collaboration internationally and globally. And again, this requires the need to provide access. And that same point I made earlier, the ability to provide access which gives a positive user experience but does not detriment your security setup. So that's probably enough for me. And again, we'll touch base and we'll summarise towards the end for questions. But I'll hand over to our friends at Okta, and Scott will take this forwards from here.
Hi, thanks, David. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Goodall, and I run the educational vertical here at Okta in the United Kingdom. I'm joined by 2 colleagues, Matt Bailey and James Richmond, who are solutions engineers, and will be covering the elements towards the end and certainly around demonstrating some of the capabilities of Okta. I'm very quickly going to present some slides here. I'll try and get through these as quickly as possible. But I just want to level set as to what Okta is and what it can provide. So Okta was founded in 2009 and is the leader in identity and access management. So what does that mean? We provide solutions for single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and lifecycle management. And we do that for workforce users and also for your students. The tagline, as per the previous slide, is to enable any organization to use any technology. So what do we mean by that? We mean that you have a myriad of applications and solutions that you use internally at a university for staff and for students. We want to be the layer. We want to provide access to all of those different solutions, no matter where they are or where they're hosted. So we are a cloud hosted organization. However, we do also have a solution for your on-premise solutions as well. And what we're seeing more than ever is the shift from people going into an office every day and working. Obviously, given where we are at the moment with COVID-19, this shift happened very quickly last year when people all of a sudden had to work from home. And I think this is much more prevalent now than it's ever been, whereby people don't go into an office or school or university, sit behind their laptop 9 to 5 and go home. The perimeter is now everywhere. And we believe the only way to successfully guard against this and be secure is with identity. Identity determines and governs the correct access at the correct time for the correct people. And we see it as the glue between all of the applications and services people in your organizations use every day. And this is also a really important slide. It's not just your members of staff and your students, but also we have to think of other areas of identity. Contractors, for instance, so in the words of an educational institute, this could be lecturers who are lecturing with you for 3 months or 6 months. It could be contractors that you're working with in IT and want to give them access for, say, 3 months before cutting them off. Also, we talk here around partners. We've seen universities wanting to share data and applications with not only other public sector organizations, but also out into the commercial world. And how can you do that in a safe and secure way? And also, we will need to do this, enable this across different infrastructure, whether it be in the cloud, whether it be on-premise, whether it be in Azure, AWS, Google, across different applications. Vast majority of you will probably use Office 365. Some customers use Google. We need to be able to support you no matter what the infrastructure is, no matter what the application is. And Okta can provide that glue and give you access to all of your identity requirements. And we believe that our platform is the foundation of a zero trust strategy. We have over 7,000 connections in our Okta integration network. So what does this mean? This means that out of the box, some of the applications that you can see on screen here as an example are able for you to use completely free as an Okta customer. You can link into any of these without the requirement to do any scripting, coding, developing, etc. These are all out of the box integrations that you can simply plug into. So as an example, again, as Office 365, SSO, provisioning, multi-factor authentication are all out of the box integrations that we have as part of the Okta integration network. Way more than double the person who's in second when it comes to these pre-built integrations. We also cover various other things which we won't touch upon today, but just note that, of course, single sign-on and multi-factor authentication is really, really important. Lifecycle management, which we're covering in detail today, is all around how you provision and deprovision your staff and students access to applications. So we can go into the granular level and detail of this person is, for instance, a student in the history department. Therefore, they need access to these applications. We can also go one step further and say this person is a student in the history department. They also need access to these Teams channels or these Slack channels, as an example. So not only can we provide provisioning and deprovisioning of applications, but we can also define rights within those applications. We also cover something called advanced server access here, which is something we're not going to cover in a lot of detail, but just know that we can provide security from an MFA perspective and actually get a very comprehensive solution that goes further than MFA to your infrastructure. So whether it be on-prem, whether it be in the cloud, as I say, in Azure, AWS or Google. Some of the universities that we see here are utilizing Okta on a day-to-day basis. They're using Okta for their MFA requirements, their SSO requirements, and lifecycle management, which is great. And yes, we have some of the world's biggest brands, of course, using Okta as well. It's not just in the education space that we're known. We're known as a global leader here in identity and access management. And just to prove that, here are some of the stats that we have on a day-to-day basis on our environment. 200 million activated users, 2.1 billion app identities, etc., etc. And this is the most important thing that I would highlight to any customer. In any agreement that we sign with customers, we have a 99.99 SLA uptime. We cannot afford for our users to be able to authenticate or log into any service or applications. Touch wood. I know I'm sort of bringing myself into something here, but we have never been breached, and we've maintained that SLA every single year that we've been in existence. What I'd like to do now is hand over to I've recorded a conversation that I had with the CIO at Seton Hall University, which are a big customer of ours in the United States, as to why they chose Okta, why do they use Okta, and what do they use it for. And I'd like to play that now. I'd also note that there is quite a heavy edit at one point, and the reason for that is we talk about the acquisition that Okta has recently made of Auth0, and we just wanted to cut that bit out just to make sure that we're not messing with the finalizing of that acquisition. So I think he comes up with some really interesting points as to why they chose Okta, and he's also very happy to have conversations with any prospective customers as to the benefits that they see about using Okta. So if I play this video now, and I invite any questions in the chat while this is out and about. Appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me. I know I'm probably keeping you from much more busier things, but just the reason for the chat. Obviously, I've seen the case study. By way of introduction, I run the education business here in the UK for Okta, and we're speaking with lots of university customers over here. We're still very early in the stages with customers over here. Certainly nothing like they are in the States from an Okta perspective. And so I just wondered if I just wanted to understand what you're using Okta for. How are you finding it? Do you like it? Was there a reason why you chose Okta over any other technologies, etc., etc.? It's just basically a chat, really, to understand. And so I'm selling the story to the customers over here in the right way.
Yeah. So we've been an Okta customer now for a while. I want to say at least 5 years. It's not long.
Oh wow, early days.
Yes, we were very early. Actually, we were one of the first higher ed customers, if not the first higher ed customer, with Okta, and really we were very progressive for a university in the United States, thinking about the cloud. Right. We really wanted to reduce the footprint of what was on campus. We really wanted to, ultimately with the cloud, one of the things we're doing is spreading the risk, right? And now you guys are taking the risk as the identity platform manager. Microsoft is taking the risk from the collaboration space, right? And we're sort of mitigating all of that stuff and spreading the risk around, so we're not one single target, but we're lots of little targets. So
sure.
And really it was our executive director for information and architecture, Matt Stevenson, who found you guys at I think he was coming from a Gartner conference. They did Gartner Symposium in Orlando. He had seen it. We started to go into it, and we had a homegrown single sign-on solution for the longest time. But account issues are when let's not call it an account issue, we'll call it an identity issue, can sometimes be very hairy to figure out, right? Where did it break down? Did they not get the right attribute in an ERP? Did they come in and did they not come through the normal onboarding process, either as a student or an employee, right? And what sort of happened? And one of the things that Okta did for us very early on was around single sign-on. We were able to take this homegrown single sign-on that was really faking single sign-on, right? A lot of times we were doing some crazy stuff in the background to make it look like it was single sign-on, but really it was synchronized sign-on. So Okta really gave us that true single sign-on, and certainly much more visibility, even in the early stages of what was going on in any particular user's account. And the one thing that we hadn't done at the time was bring up, we were Microsoft Shop for email, but we didn't like ADFS. Our people joined the domain. They don't anymore. We're moving everybody to Intune. But self-service password resets were not possible from off campus, right? You had to be on campus. You hit Control-Alt-Delete, you changed your password, and then eventually that would make it to your email and the learning system and things like that, because everything was LDAP integrated at the time. So
Sure.
Okta gave us true single sign-on. It gave us true app access, right? Based on roles. So, as we started to add our providers to single sign-on, we can automate that process. So your role's an employee, so you get app 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. As a student, you get app 1, 2, skip 3, 4, and 5. You get 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
So it really allowed us to do that role-based single sign-on, self-service password, sort of reduce calls to the help desk. And then as the product matured, it got better and better.
Sure.
Right. We added text messaging for self-service. We eventually added MFA, which is a boon. And I started to say before, right, we had much more visibility into what was happening. Where were you signing in from? Were you on campus? Were you off campus?
Sure.
Were you off campus 3 minutes ago, and now you're signing in from China, right? 6 minutes later, right? So suddenly, all of those things are now. So we initially go for single sign-on for user experience, but we get reduced calls to the help desk. We get better visibility into what's going on with our users and where they're signing in from. So our security posture gets better. We did have a false start with provisioning, right? We thought we would do account provisioning with Okta. That didn't go well, but it was very early. And in fact, the sales VP that promised it, I think, was gone 6 months later. Not specifically as a result of that, but probably as a result of lots of promises that couldn't
materialize.
You know how that goes. The VP of sales is promising the world that the development team is like, I can't deliver that.
Yeah, sure.
So there was, and then of course there was growing pains, right? Okta was very focused on the enterprise, didn't really have its focus on higher ed. So the pricing model became a problem for us too.
Yeah.
But working with folks, we had great account reps. Todd McKinnon had been on campus with us.
Oh wow!
A couple of times. Oh,
cool.
That's how early, right? That's
how
early it was. He probably wouldn't come now, especially after spending $6 billion on Auth0.
Auth0, yeah.
Yeah.
Exciting times.
Yeah, certainly. But back in the day when he was trying to break into the higher ed world, he did. We had dinner with him a couple of times. So
that's great to hear.
It was just things just fit in the right ways. There is no better single sign-on product in the world, in our opinion. It is just easy to use. It gets better and better with time. We get a much better, like I said, visibility. Now we throw alerts, right? Now our users get alerts when there's a sign in, when it's a new computer, right? We haven't taken the step to say, things like, is this really you? Did you really just sign in here or there? Right. We don't want to get too chatty, because the more chatty we get, the more email they send to, one of the executive team to say, is this for real? Is this you? Right. So, we're trying to find that balance of
usability versus security kind of thing.
Yeah. Making sure the user knows what's going on with their account, but not getting too chatty that they get suspicious.
Sure.
So really we couldn't be any happier. We want to take the next step into passwordless, right? That's
zero trust.
Yeah, we would love to figure out how we do that. But Okta is really I call it a dashboard. So we have our suite of services that we offer our users. We call Pirate Net, right? So our big claim to fame from an athletics perspective is basketball team, right? So it's Seton Hall Pirates. That's our basketball team, right?
Yep.
It's good team most of the time, although we lost Wednesday night.
Oh no.
So we call all of our network services PirateNet. And that used to be a very specific product. It used to be a portal product that then we moved into saying, no, it's not a portal product. It is all of our services wrapped into one. You don't need to worry about what product you're using, to do X, but you go into PirateNet to do X, right? So that's sort of the marketing communications piece that we've gone. But the first step is, what do you get to log into PirateNet? We've used the custom login API with Okta to present a customized login screen on our website. So people go there on that page, right? We tell you how to change your password. We give you the contact to the service desk. We put out outages and alerts, right? So people have this place to go to not just sign into to all things IT, but if we have an important message like a system is down, you're going to hit that right there. And then their next step is Okta, and we call it the PirateNet dashboard, right? Because it's the dashboard of, I hate the word, I don't know if you guys use this, but early on we used the word chiclet.
Right? Yeah, it's still there.
I hate it so much. So
I'm with you.
Every time somebody says it, I said, you mean an app, right? Like you get to the dashboard with the apps on it, right? Those are all apps because they're not gum. So that's the first step for everybody, is to get there. Nobody bookmarks anything anymore because it's just easy enough to sign into PirateNet, and those are all of our instructions. Whoops. My Siri thought I was talking to it.
All in that one place, right? Yeah, for staff and students, it's so easy. Much better experience, isn't it?
That's right. And it's for even our funky techs, right? Our functional technical people out in the business units, right? That everything is single sign-on. It's very, very few applications are not going through there from a security and control perspective, right? If you separate from the university, I don't want to have to go to 12 places to make sure your access is removed. I want to go to one, and that's what we do, right? So
that's great.
We do it in exchange. It feeds through over to Okta. They get nothing. We are extremely happy with there's things we would love for what I call the dashboard to do. I'd love to be able to get messaging in there. I'd love to be able to move around things like on my own rather than just a new app appear at the bottom, but I'd love to get the top 4 apps to always be at the top by users. So there's little user experience things that I would improve there, but otherwise it's just so easy to use even from the IT end.
That's the thing. Both sides, I think it's really easy. What kind of applications are you kind of using then? Obviously, Office 365. I'm guessing. What kind of other things are you sort of accessing through it?
This is how you get to our ERP. It's how students register. It's how students pay their bills. It's all of our Office 365 apps, our learning management system.
Cool.
It's pretty much a requirement. If you're buying a piece of technology that needs a login, we tell them it needs to be it needs to support SAML 2.0, and then specifically we say you need to be able to work with Okta. So we you name it. EAB is a tool that we use. It's a student success tool. Our digital signage software, our timesheets, our faculty productivity software, our web content management system. I mean, you name it, it's in there.
That's a really good idea, actually. And I don't think there's a lot of organisations I speak to that make that. It has to be SAML or has to be OID Connect, etc. That's really interesting that you mentioned that. I think that you're right. That should be the capability on any technology that you bring in. But it's an interesting mandate.
It's a control perspective, right? So you get somebody who has a local admin account on an application that we don't know about. And they either separate from the university or they want to do something nefarious. There's no there's nothing we can do or say about it. So if IT is going to be the ones held responsible for application security like that, then we need the ability to do the application security. Right?
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, so our our budgeting software, our instance of DocuSign for signing stuff, our library system, you name it, the student health portal. It's all in there, and if it's and we use ultimately bookmarks a lot too, right? So
Yeah.
even though things are
Yeah.
SAMlified, if we want to do a deep link to something, we do lots of bookmarks in there. You know, nobody else knows it, that it's just a bookmark, but we do.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The end users wouldn't know, right? It just appears in their dashboard, and yeah, they can click on it and connect to it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what made you kind of choose Okta over anything else? Did you sort of look at other technologies? What was there something that made Okta that you felt was the right decision?
Yeah, sure. We were on Oracle Identity Manager. It was
Okay.
a disaster. It didn't do any of what Okta does. So what was our alternative? Microsoft's identity platform, right? Those are heavy lifts. And by the way, at the time, weren't cloud-based.
Yeah.
Right. So
you're right.
you know, it's a different story. You know, practically a good part of 10 years later. You know, it's a different story, right? You can do Azure Active Directory and throw up that identity platform. I wouldn't touch an Oracle platform with a 10-foot pole at this point, but I really don't think there's too many competitors, at least from my perspective, for Okta. There's some of the big players. You just bought a big one.
I've got just one last point. I just wondered if you'd come across this, because lots of universities in the UK seemingly have this interesting scenario where some staff are students, some students are staff. Is that something you have in the States?
Yeah.
How do you kind of deal with that?
Everyone has a primary role, right?
Yeah.
So we do have multiple roles, right? So one of the benefits of working at the university is you take classes for free. So if I was in a program, I would have both an employee role and a student role. So the way it works is, if you're an employee, that's your primary role. No matter what else you're doing, your primary role at the university is that you work here.
Yeah.
If I'm teaching a class, right? So if I'm an adjunct, right, they're paying me to teach one class a few $1,000s. My primary role is still employee because I'm an adjunct, right? So employee is superior. Employee and faculty are separate. You would never really be both of those things, right? You're either a faculty member, who is an employee, by the way, it's just a different class of employee, or an employee, right? But we separate them because they get access to different things. So those two things you could never be the same, right? You can never be at the same time, I mean. But I can be an employee and a student, and then employee will always be prime. Or I can be a faculty member and a student, and a faculty member will always be prime. And then if you're just a student, you're a student. Now we do have student employees, but that doesn't give them access to anything except a timesheet application.
Okay.
So we have an attribute in our ERP that says, you know, Paul is a student employee, and then that attribute feeds to Okta and account provisioning and gives you access to the app that you need. Automatically. So, and you know, a lot of this is done with groups in the back end, right? And Okta looks at the AD membership of groups to say, okay, they're in this group, so they get these apps. So that's how we mix and match. Because even if I was a student, if I'm hired full time, I'm going to be, again, my primary role is going to be employee. I'm going to move from a primary role to employee. Yeah. So we just went through that. It's more like a logic step, right? Okay, what are the what roles are subservient to the others? But it doesn't preclude you from getting anything. It's just, they don't even need to be subservient, really. They could all be equal. Because if my employee role gives me access to Outlook, and so does my student role, I'm only going to get Outlook once, right? So it really doesn't have to be as complicated as people might think it is.
Get you. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So it's effectively linked to your ERP, and it all feeds from there. That's interesting. Didn't like that.
It all feeds from the HR system or the student system.
Makes sense. That was it, really. But listen, I really appreciate your time, and I don't want to take. Okay, two heavy edits there at the end. thank you very much for listening to that. I think he hits on some really good points, and it's good to hear the good points and possibly some of the areas that we have to work on. He was also talking about Pirate Net, by the way, not Pirate Bay. If I'm going to hand over to James Richmond now and Matt Bailey, who are a couple of solutions engineers here at Okta, and they're going to take you through how you can effectively use Okta for the deprovisioning and provisioning of applications. Over to you two.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Scott. So hi, everyone. Welcome this morning, and thank you for listening to everything so far. What we're going to be doing over the next couple of sections is giving you a bit of an overview around the lifecycle management capabilities of what Okta can do here, and highlighting some of the challenges that we can solve for you inside of your organizations, whether you're a student, whether you're a member of staff, whether you're alumni. So what I want to focus on here is around the customer identity aspect that we have here at Okta. So let's run through a few of these different pieces now. Of course, where that lifecycle management challenges actually starts off. Well, of course, as you are a university and as we're all aware, there is always an explosion of students joining the university and leaving the university on a yearly basis. And of course, on that journey, we also have many different devices and a lot more applications that we're also using throughout that life cycle of working or using those resources within our university. So this is one of those challenges we're continually facing with being able to control the access that our students have, whether they're joining the university or maybe whether they're graduating. And that's before we look at the other aspects of how this works for our administrators. So of course, with Shadow IT, for instance, there are many departments and many schools within your universities. And of course, with this comes the management of those different applications and different resources that the students will be needing access to if they are within those different schools. And that's before we even look further at those different generations of the technology that we've used in the past. Again, highlighting the hybrid environment here. These could be applications that are running on premise. They could be applications that we're moving more towards those cloud platforms such as AWS or GCP. And of course, here at Okta, we can support all of those different use cases to ensure that as a student, you're provided that seamless experience, but as an administrator, you can remove all of that IT friction that you faced before. So let's actually take a look here at a typical life cycle for a student and how we can apply Okta to the scenarios that you're facing here. Well, of course, if we run through the three main steps of a student joining university, firstly, of course, we're going to do our application. It may be that we have that self-service registration at the very beginning. We may have to provide some details about ourselves. It may be an identity check that we need to run across our account before joining university. All of this can be quite a stringent process, and all of this will determine the access that you're going to assign to that student that's joining the organization. So we can see there in that first step, we're going to assign those resources, the course-related apps, and of course, the applications that you have access to and those resources are going to be different for every single student, depending on their course, depending on their year, and potentially it could be for a student that's only doing a year while studying abroad. And then we move into the second stage of how this life cycle can apply to a particular student. And this is quite a complicated stage for universities that are currently facing this. And it's actually something we will show you in the demonstration later. And what Matt will be taking you through is that mover process. So a student that becomes a member of staff, or maybe they graduate, or maybe they change courses. All of this can be quite complicated and add additional friction to their IT layer to ensure that we are giving the correct access at the right time to the right person. And then that final stage around that leaver. So when we graduate, when we become that alumni, or maybe we leave our course and don't actually graduate in the first place, or maybe that forced removal, we need to ensure that we are removing the access that we had as a student in that entirety of the process. So making sure we're pulling back those licenses and making sure they don't have access to the resources that maybe they haven't paid for entirely for that particular year. So let me take you through how Okta applies to these three main stages here, because we do a lot in these different areas in terms of that lifecycle management piece. And as mentioned on the call earlier on, and as Scott mentioned earlier on in this same slide, we have a number of different products here at Okta. The first area of which is that student identity part. This is essentially that customer identity experience. You and I both experience this on a day-to-day basis whenever we access a service that we are a customer of. And that's mainly that authentication and authorization piece. And then we have that employee identity. So how do we cover off those use cases for when that student actually becomes a member of staff? Maybe they're going to be providing lectures. They need different access to the resources they're going to use to actually provide these lectures. All of this is encompassed within one single platform. So these aren't split out into different platforms to manage. They can be managed all from one central place and are formed from an abundance of platform services. Think of these as microservices to pull all these different products together. So that was just a quick run through of where Okta can apply here. The main area of focus that we'll be looking at today is that lifecycle management part, how we can automate absolutely everything whenever it comes to a student moving between different roles, making sure they have the correct access on day one, and ensuring that when they graduate, they are moved into a different type of user, whether this be alumni, and ensuring the access is consistent across the whole board. So now I'm going to pass you over to Matt, who's going to take you through a few other details around how Okta applies here, a few challenges we resolve, and then we'll be going into a demonstration. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, James, and good morning, everyone. I have three quick topics to discuss before I get on to the lifecycle management demonstration. So the first one I have is around enhancing the student experience, and we've talked about the possible friction there is from an authentication point. The users obviously authenticating generally with a password, and how that password is enforced and managed. And I'm sure if you speak to any IT help desk, the number one challenge that they always kind of talk to me about is password resets. So what Okta we try and do is obviously give the control to the end user, giving them the self-service capabilities to manage that password, whether they forget it, and obviously being able to put them in control of their own identity. But authentication isn't just passwords. We mentioned earlier on about passwordless, using something like biometrics to authenticate rather than having to remember a complex password. But it's also being able to get the right context, whether a student or a staff member is authenticating, and whether a staff member needs to provide maybe a second factor of authentication. Maybe they're accessing more sensitive data, so they have to provide that second factor to ensure it definitely is the staff member that's accessing those resources. The second point I wanted to quickly touch upon was around kind of integration. And I guess as Scott mentioned, Okta is the glue that kind of connects all these things together. And we're talking about obviously cloud apps. We're talking sometimes about kind of legacy on-prem apps as well. But also there's lots of other directories that we generally find and uncover with the education sector. So there could be kind of legacy LDAPs, active directories, which have to remain in place for various reasons. And Okta works really well in kind of connecting to these and handling kind of managing kind of attributes, with our universal directory products, which is what I wanted to talk about next. Our universal directory is a store of many attributes associated to the user or the staff member, and I will talk through this in the demo because we use it a lot to use the data to create specific groups for the users. So our real pillar is this universal directory, which enables us to do the single sign-on, the provisioning capabilities, as we kind of connect into the various applications that students and staff members need access to. And the final point I wanted to mention was quickly around kind of APIs. And a lot of modern applications are looking at an API-driven kind of capability. So the challenge from an Okta perspective is not just necessarily about authenticating and giving the user access to the application, but it's what that user can actually do once they've authenticated. So we start to talk about kind of authorization and actually how Okta can help secure the identity of the user, but also be able to mint tokens with specific data, which an application can then absorb to be able to create a more granular kind of access to those applications. So it's something that we're seeing more and more kind of applications kind of built from an API perspective, and then kind of handle the access with access tokens. So with that, I wanted to, like I said, do this demonstration about Lifecycle, which is the main kind of challenge we have with education. And obviously Lifecycle, as kind of James and Scott have mentioned, obviously it is a real I guess, laborious exercise for universities and education kind of sector to handle the complexities of people moving around during someone's time at universities. And obviously what we're trying to achieve here is obviously an increased productivity, whilst ensuring that everything remains secure. So giving students access to the right apps, but also protecting them in the way that we need to, whether that's multi-factor at a per app level or not. And everything that happens within Okta obviously is logged and stored. So we do have kind of a full kind of audit of the changes that happen when people move from during their journey. And so with that, I wanted to start the demonstration. Now I have obviously pre-recorded this demonstration. So I will talk, but I haven't done the audio. So I will talk through the demonstration as we go along. So our journey starts with Harry. Harry has applied to university, and he needs access to do some of his kind of functionality. But before I talk about kind of Harry and the start of his journey, this screen here shows a kind of typical kind of log-on flow. And I first wanted to talk about, do we actually need another identity? I would say that today's generation already have many identities that they're perhaps bringing with them. Two examples I have on here is kind of Facebook and Apple. So like I said, the generation that we have today, they already have an existing kind of identity where they have their own passwords. So we have seen some conversations about people actually being able to bring their identity with them. No need to create them a separate username and password, but actually kind of, like I said, use their additional kind of Facebook or Apple accounts to be the starting point for their access, as you can see here. But we're going to park that conversation for another time, and we're going to kind of spin up a new account here for Harry. So the journey starts with Harry receiving this email from ACCO University, congratulating him on his successful application, and obviously giving him a link to activate his student account. So Harry is going to obviously click on this link here. And obviously when he clicks on this link, he's going to be asked to set up his new password. And you can see on the screen here that we have some password requirements that we have set and controlled from Okta. So in this case, it must be 8 characters, a lowercase, uppercase, a number, and doesn't contain any part of his username. So these are the criteria that we have defined is acceptable with our security team for Harry to create the accounts. And straight away, Harry is now signed in. Now this obviously is several months before Harry actually starts at university. So he gets access to, I guess, some birthright applications that he can use to assist him on his kind of accommodation booking, selecting his halls of residence. So here is the Okta kind of back end. And like I said, what I'm going to talk through today is obviously a sample of the things that we can do. But this is the universal directory, and we're going to take a look at Harry's account here. So we can see those applications listed out that Harry has access to, which groups he's part of, and Harry's profile, where you can see his address, contact information that we've stored. But the important part of these ones that I've set up down here, his UCAS number, when he enrolled, start date, end date, which course he's signed up to, which modules, and his user type. So we can see here that he is a student. But his course is actually false because he hasn't actually started on premise, on campus yet. Now in this demonstration, I have obviously manually changed it from false to true. But what I wanted to talk about is how Okta can automate this with our workflows products, as you can see here. Now, workflows is an engine which allows people to define things with an if-this kind of format to be able to automate several actions based on events. The event I'm going to talk through here is to do with running it on a schedule, and we're going to check to see if the current date is matched with the actual Harry's start date. And if it is true, then we're going to change an attribute to yes. And obviously the workflows product can be built out with lots of different examples. People being assigned certain applications, and it can trigger a lot of different flows to be able to do this. So what you're seeing here is this high-level workflow, which is basically looking at a group to see all my inactive users. And this kind of workflow works from left to right when it gets triggered. And you can see roughly what's happening here. We're comparing those two dates. And if the date is set, we are going to change it to true, as I did manually in the demonstration. So when that is set to true, we can say that Harry is now on campus and has started his studies. So because that has happened, Harry now has access to some other applications. So because Harry is taking a maths module, he gets some access to Pi for Beginners, MATLAB, maths coursework submission, but it also has access to the Microsoft Office 365 suite that we have automatically provisioned behind the scenes. So as you can see here, when we click on Microsoft Word, I believe I click on, he gets single signed on into Word without asking for any other credentials. And that account has been provisioned and controlled by Okta. We're handling the licenses, and Harry has access without any kind of pain point or friction for him to get access to the applications that he needs access to. So Harry does well at university. He passes his first year with flying colours. He passes his second year, and he starts his third year. And during his third year, he wants to volunteer and earn some extra money, and wants to become a tutor and also help out in one of the labs. So Harry then needs to transition to be both a student and a staff member. So what we're going to do here in the Okta Universal Directory is give him access to be both a student and a staff member.
Oh, sorry about that. Don't know why that's just jumped in there. Let me see if I can get that back up for you.
No worries.
Just see if we
skip
can,
through to when he became a staff member. That'd be great.
Yeah. Is that okay, or is it a bit further on?
Yeah, it's pretty about 30 seconds ahead of this, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, he's now become alumni. Yeah, so if I pause that, and obviously you'll see roughly what happened there. When he became a staff member, he got access to some staff member applications. Obviously, one was a health and safety app. The other one was a tutor booking system. So you could see how when you give kind of the control in Universal Directory to him as a staff member, we're picking that up from a group membership perspective and ensuring that he gets access to the additional staff apps whilst also remaining as a student to access his modules. So Harry goes off and graduates and successfully gets his degree. But of course, once you then leave kind of university, generally speaking, you still need access to a couple of things after you've left. And as you can see here, he is now an alumni, and he gets access to some alumni applications with that same identity. So what we've done is deprovisioned his access to Office 365. We've removed that license, and it's ready for the next student. Obviously, removed his access to any staff apps, any other applications that he needs access to. And he now has only access to these kind of 5 applications as an alumni. So that's kind of the rough journey of Harry from kind of starting university, getting access to some birthright apps, and be able to book his accommodation for when he actually starts. The day he actually starts and attends campus, he gets access to his modules and any kind of applications for his kind of degree, like Office 365, kind of or G Suite, those kinds of applications. And then obviously, as he becomes a staff member, he gets another subset of applications. And then obviously, when he becomes an alumni, all that gets revoked, and he gets access to some other applications. And all this was, as you could see, was controlled via Okta, fully automated with our provisioning and lifecycle management capability. So with that, I'm going to throw it back over to David now to wrap things up.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, guys. That was really useful. I'll just open up the slide. I'll just go to the last couple.
David, we've just got a couple of questions in the chat as well that would be good to answer live as well.
Yes, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just flick through to, there we go, questions. We'll move on to this one instead, actually. So Karen has got a question as well. So Barry had a question, which I can see James has answered in the chat pod. Anybody feel free to have a look at that in a bit more depth. But there is a question from Karen Evans as well. So how do you manage linking of staff and student accounts? With two separate systems for students and staff, there is no specific link field between them. How do you identify the link between them to process roles?
Matt, would you like to answer this based on what you put together today as to how that approach you've put in place?
Yeah, I can do, and thanks for the question. I guess the interesting thing is there's always different ways to do it. We generally find that there's no kind of one way that fits everybody. Obviously, in the demonstration that I showed, we were just adding an additional flag to an attribute to kind of give them kind of another access to that separate accounts. But we have seen people, actually create separate kind of identities. Now, obviously, as a solution, I would obviously, as an ideal solution, having a single identity with both access to student and staff is a lot easier from an end user perspective. But we have seen people actually create separate kind of identities for both, student and staff from an ID perspective. So yeah, James, I don't know if you've got any experience that you've done with that as well.
Yeah, so from previous experience, when I was a student myself, I actually was a member of staff for the university too, and in that position, I was actually given two separate identities, and I found this quite problematic at times, especially with experiencing getting access that I needed to do that job that I was fulfilling at my university, and actually approach that Matt's put in place here. And I think this is, for an end user perspective, I would have found it easier to have all of my access given to me in one single identity as we've seen there. So as a student, I've got all my apps in one place in my dashboard. And then as I become a member of staff, I can have another section added into that dashboard with my work apps that I would be using. And essentially, I've got that very simple user experience. I can sign in once, I've got access to all those different applications. And if we were concerned about the access or the security behind accessing these applications, Okta can actually enforce MFA onto specific applications too. So if you were concerned about that in any manner as well. But essentially, Karen, to answer your question around how we can link those different identities together, you, as Matt said, you can have different identities for those different types of user, whether it's staff or students, or if a student does become a member of staff, you can have all of that access given in one single identity. So there's many options there for how it would work for you. But as I mentioned in the answer to Barry in his question earlier on, it can all be automated using workflows. So as an administrator, you can ensure that the correct access is always going to be given at the right time. And if you give a specific date for when someone leaves that particular role, we can ensure that it's all offboarded and deprovisioned at that exact moment that they leave that role. So you can ensure that they're not going to walk away as a student with staff access after they move out of it.
Brilliant. That seems like a very comprehensive response. And I think applicable for everybody on the call, really. If there's any particular questions you want to pick up separately or you want to follow up with them, and maybe, again, everybody tends to have some unique elements to their own estate and setup, I'm more than happy to arrange some one-on-one calls and to go through some of the demonstration or the discussion around those challenges on a one-to-one basis. Well, I'll hold on another minute just to see if there are any more questions from anybody. If not, though, we do thank everybody for their time today. Hope it was of benefit. And we'll touch base just to make sure any follow-up queries or questions are addressed accordingly. Thank you.